Hi, Gary Zacharias here, and you're listening to the Apologist Bookshelf. All right, I got halfway through chapter 2 last time in Brierley's book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. I'd like to go ahead and finish that off. If you remember, he was talking about what's gone on. We've lost a story. That Christianity offered a story of how we got here and our purpose, that we were created by God. We fell. Israel came. God was going to use Israel as a redemption plan. And then the redemption came in the form of Jesus. And there's a new creation awaiting us. And we had that story for centuries. And then the last 50 years, 75 years, we've lost it as we've walked away from God. And what are we replacing it with? Not much. It's all about us and creating our own identity. And that has not been a success. We've had mental health problems that are skyrocketing. People are more unhappy than they've ever been before. So I'm going to pick up with just the part that I started to get into at the end of the last podcast. So he says, New Atheism has made a big deal about tearing down the Christian narrative, getting rid of it. But what was erected in its place? Well, the hopes of secularism have crashed. Yeah, we've had more science. Yes, we've had more technology. It's made our life comfortable. It's made our life safer. But it hasn't delivered a flourishing, connected, and happier future. In fact, we've had more people unhappy. He said, we are innately meaning-seeking creatures. People are. In fact, Brierley says we're innately religious. And he said, if you get rid of one set of beliefs, if it's taken away, it's going to be replaced by something else that's got some kind of form of religious belief. He said, yeah, we've gotten rid of the church-going people. Unfortunately, in the West, they're disappearing. And you've got the nuns coming along, the ones that don't believe in any of this church stuff, but it doesn't mean they're becoming more atheists. So what's happening? Well, the sacraments and the signs of traditional religion, Brierley says, have been replaced by some kind of New Age spirituality that talks about mindfulness and meditation. He said you hear people talk about, well, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And said social media is a breeding ground for all sorts of conspiracy claims, all sorts of, we've got flat earthers, pseudoscientific medical practices. Isn't that amazing? You get rid of God, and the atheists were hoping people would become extremely rational. And that's not true at all. They've gotten carried away with some of the worst things. It says we're getting religious extremism that's finding all sorts of fertile soil in disaffected young men and women. You have Islamic extremists out there taking normal people who've lost the Christian message. They got to live with something. They've got to have something to hang on to, and they get turned into ISIS fighters and suicide bombers. So he says whether it's mild or extreme faith these days, we have people who are willing to believe in something beyond science and beyond reason. That seems to be built into people. He mentions a best-selling author, David Foster Wallace, who said this, in the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there's actually no such thing as atheism. There's no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. I think that is really powerful. Here's the bad news. Footnote to that, David Foster Wallace, 3 years later, he took his own life. He struggled with depression. So we're getting replacement religious beliefs. He calls them quasi-religious beliefs. And we get all these new forms, for example, of sexual and gender categories. He says that's an example. People are defending that with religious fervor. He says we've got a meaning crisis, and it's an identity crisis. He asks this question, who am I supposed to emulate when traditional role models are outmoded? To what causes do I have to signal my allegiance to earn the approval of my peers? And when identity is floating all over the place, how do I decide on my own identity? And he said it turns out that if you lose the Christian narrative that used to guide people and give them purpose, then purpose and identity that are lost. And he said we're just beginning to see the effects of that in the world. And he gets back to Jordan Peterson again. He said, if you look at Peterson's best-selling book, 12 Rules for Life, you'd think, oh, he'll probably come up with some secular approach to psychology. But it said it has all sorts of references to the Bible and Christian beliefs in the search for meaning and purpose. I think that's interesting. Said you also might expect if he's going to do public lectures, he books a theater and it's got Bible stories in it. I think that's fascinating. I love to see stuff like that. It said, no wonder so many Christian leaders have taken notice of Jordan Peterson and his positive comments toward the Christian faith. I mean, you look around in churches these days, Brierley says its young males are absent, but Peterson draws them in with a message that sounds a lot like Christianity. And it's led to endless blogs about the Peterson phenomenon as far as, and speculation about his own personal beliefs. He said, but, Peterson is one public thinker that's coming back to at least the value of Christianity, but he's not alone. And so he's going to share, at this point, Brierley's going to share some other stories. He said, here's one, Douglas Murray. He's an associate editor of The Spectator, and he wrote a book called The Madness of Crowds, a critique of how we've fragmented our culture into all sorts of warring interest groups. He's agnostic. He's gay. He's a journalist, lost his faith, became friends, hung out with Christopher Hitchens during the New Atheism. But Brierley asked Murray, what do you think about the New Atheism now? And here's what Murray said. New Atheism made claims that were self-confessedly wrong. The claim, for instance, that morality was obviously wrong. The claim that the basic ethics that we might share are self-evident is self-evidently not the case. So Murray went on to describe, in the absence of a shared narrative and identity that we got from Christianity, Western culture is in danger of unraveling. Why? Because we got all these endlessly competing narratives, and we're turning into little pieces, not a solid mass anymore. He warns of a religious, he calls it Pharisaism, of the new wave identity politics. There's no grace or forgiveness out there. You better march to their beat or you're in trouble. Murray finds himself haunted by his own past Christian faith. Here's what he said. I'm now in the self-confessedly conflicted and complex situation of being, among other things, an uncomfortable agnostic who recognizes the values and the virtues of the Christian faith and what it's brought. Isn't that interesting? Here's another man. He's a YouTube host, Dave Rubin, R-U-B-I-N. He told a pretty similar story when Brierley talked to him. He has a 1 million-plus subscriber channel called The Rubin Report. He's undergone a political transformation. He was a pretty left-wing comedian, and now he's a right-leaning conservative pundit. But he's had a spiritual journey as well, not just a political journey. He was at one time really in love with the promise of new atheism, but he doesn't call himself an atheist anymore, and he's starting to reconnect with his Jewish roots and even explore the claims of Christianity. It turned out that Jordan Peterson was somewhat of a mentor to Rubin. Here's what Rubin said, I just don't like the word atheist. It doesn't fit what I believe. I think Jordan has gone a long way toward articulating the type of thing that I believe in. And Rubin is again concerned about the aggression of activists in the secular square. He says right now believers are more tolerant. Who are the most intolerant people in society right now? It's the people that are constantly telling you how tolerant they are. That's the irony. It's the people that tell you you're a bunch of racists and bigots and homophobes. So that's Rubin. Interesting thought. Here's another person. Here's a Jewish media personality, Bari Weiss, B-A-R-I. She, in 2020, she resigned. She was an op-ed writer at the New York Times, and she complained bitterly about the curtailing of free thought in her profession. Now, she describes herself as liberal and center-left, but she's out of step with those people at that paper, and she identified her concerns about this politically correct orthodoxy going on there. And she's written extensively about the reemergence of anti-Semitism, which I think is pretty scary. And she's begun to re-embrace, she says, a traditional religious identity. She says there are big problems with new atheism. And she said she's starting to connect with her own Judaism and Jewish history. She said, the stronger my conviction has become, the more she's looking into this. I'm just extremely clear on who I am, what I'm about, what I'm fighting for. So she's bought into the Judeo-Christian story. Here's another person, Russell Brand. You probably recognize him, well-known TV personality and actor and comedian. He's been on a journey of self-discovery. Now, he was a party animal at one time, a serious addiction to sex and drugs. But what's gone on in his life? He's on a spiritual quest. He's renounced that previous lifestyle. He says he now believes in God, and in the practice of meditation and prayer, it's brought stability, a sense of the transcendence into his life. Now, it says his spirituality is probably a little more influenced by an Eastern Universalist philosophy than Christianity, but he welcomes conversations with Christian theologians. He's critical of an atheistic view of the world that reduces meaning and purpose to nothing more than just stuff and brain chemistry. Brand said this, "When people think there's no purpose or meaning, it creates cultures that are oddly materialistic and nihilistic. And I feel like in the last 20 years, we're seeing more and more worship of self, the worship of the individual." Yeah, I think that's exactly right. How about another person here? Tom Holland. I like this story. He wrote Dominion, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World. He says he at one time loved the idea of the Greeks and the Romans and their toughness, and he presumed, when he was younger, a young historian, he presumed that the values of freedom and equality and human dignity would come out of any civilized society. But the more he studied of the ancient world, he recognized he didn't have much in common at all with those early civilizations. He said, "I began to realize that actually in almost every way, I'm a Christian." Now you've got more people. You've got Germaine Greer. You've got Camille Paglia, J.K. Rowling, Jenny Murray. They're speaking out on these new gender ideologies, as an example. How about scientists? They're actually taking a fresh look at the value of religion. Brett Weinstein, he's an evolutionary biologist. Now, he and his wife were professors at Evergreen State College in Washington. Now, maybe you saw some of this on YouTube. I saw this. They left in 2017. They had clashed with some student activists who closed down the campus. And he's now become a critic of politically correct ideologies on college campuses like Peter Boghossian. He says they're stifling academic integrity. It's not allowing for a free exchange of ideas. Let's see. How about this? Other thinkers like Ben Shapiro, Sam Harris, and Eric Weinstein, that's Brett's Weinstein, they have rallied under that intellectual dark web. So they've gotten busy. And there's a Marxist historian, Terry Eagleton. He's repeatedly pointed out to his secular contemporaries Christianity's central story of self-sacrificial love is the revolutionary force that has most shaped the moral arc of the West, rather than science that's value neutral. Well, those are just some of the secular people that Brierley is talking about. They're making these changes, which I think is amazing. He gets back, he talks again about Peterson. He had a debate. Well, it wouldn't be a debate. He had him on and was asking him questions. He says the best that Peterson would come up with, he'll call himself a religious man. He said he's conditioned in every cell as a consequence of the Judeo-Christian worldview. He says he lives his life, quote, as though God exists. So that's kind of tough, isn't it, to get it more narrow than that. Peterson is critical of Richard Dawkins and their anti-religious comments. He said that won't help anybody actually live in the world. He says the new atheists have a hell of a time with an active ethic. Yeah. He says the biblical texts are foundational. He believes the creation narrative in Genesis 1, this is Peterson now, is fundamental to our belief in the dignity and equality of humans. Why do we believe that about us and about individuals? Because of Genesis 1. Also, Peterson endorses the effect of Christianity on the world. He says the Christian doctrine elevated the individual's soul, placing slave and master and commoner and nobleman alike on the same metaphysical footing, rendering them equal before God and the law. It's nothing short of a miracle. So we take these things so much for granted these days, don't we? We just assume, yeah, people should be treating everybody well and things like that. It's coming out of the Judeo-Christian worldview, out of Christianity in particular. He says nothing short of a miracle. Okay, that's Jordan Peterson saying that. So toward the end of the chapter, Peterson talks about having religious longings. And he said he thinks that the objective world of history and fact with the narrative world of myth and meaning and beauty come together in the person of Jesus Christ. Peterson says, I'm amazed at my own belief and I don't understand it. Peterson then talks about people as though they have a soul, as if beauty and truth and meaning really do exist. So this is a wonderful thing to think about. I can see Peterson making a firm statement of faith one of these days. That'd be great to see. He says, this is kind of funny. He said, some people call Peterson a gateway drug to Orthodox Christianity. That's good, gateway drug. Says his own wife, Tammy, and his daughter, Michaela, have gone on record as having found God and peace through prayer and Bible reading. So to sum up what he's been saying here, Peterson and other public intellectuals have identified the problem in the West, a lack of meaning. That comes through over and over again. We have an identity crisis. We have no story to live by, and it's produced a lot of anxiety. And they say, we ought to do more than just thinking Christianity has something of value. We ought to think that it's true. He said, all these thinkers are pointing people back toward a story that's only useful if it's true. He said, it could be powerful, but it said it's got to point toward something that exists in reality. We just can't live on metaphors. We can't use poetry to hold God at arm's length. He says, what if that 2,000-year-old story connects with us because it's the true story to which all other stories point? And that's where he's going to go with the next chapter. So again, this was the second half of chapter 2. Justin Brierley, the author, called The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. I know you get a lot out of it, especially when you get discouraged thinking that Christianity is being bypassed. People are galloping on to the latest and the greatest, and all we can think of is, gosh, isn't that going to hurt them? Isn't that frustrating? How can they live like that? And the answer is they're having a hard time living like that, and they are coming back, many of them, the thinkers, coming back to God, as well as a lot of people in different professions. So I find that to be reassuring to hear. So if you know somebody who's living outside the Christian faith and they say, I'm doing fine, thank you, just pray for them and wait, and things will come into their life that whatever their system is now, they won't be able to handle. And they need a rock. They need some foundational story. The Christian story is the most powerful story ever created, that ever happened. Okay, well, thank you so much for being part of this podcast, and hope you're having a good day.